go ahead and get started. The next mandated training session that we're going to provide for you today is the sexual assault prevention. So I have Renee Whitley with the Franklin County Children's Task Force, and we have Paula Murray with Sappers itself. There are some new changes, so I know that we think we know all of this, but there are actually changes we were just made aware of that involve the DOE. So if you'll just give them your time, that would be fantastic, and then you'll have another break before the next session begins at 10:30.
Hi. Very different being on this side of the microphone. So please bear with me. I'm really good at presenting in front of kids, not so much in front of adults. So my name is Paula Murray, and I work for Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Services in Farmington. And I'm an educator, so I come into schools and I teach child sexual assault prevention education curriculum. We do grades pre-K through 8, but I also have the ability to come into high school classrooms as well and do lessons on healthy relationships, boundaries, consent, toxic relationships, those types of areas. And we also provide drop-in services. So I am or will be back here at Mount Abram High School soon, hopefully, and providing drop-in services, which is an advocacy support system in place for students and staff who may be struggling with some issues, whether it's sexual assault, sexual harassment, bullying, any of those types of things that may be going on either here at school or at home. And also, I've been talking with a few of the principals about going in and providing that same service at the middle school as well. So hopefully we can get that in place. I wanted to introduce also Renee Whitley from the task force. She will be speaking specifically about the mandated reporter piece of this training. So just a little bit about why you're all here and why I'm here presenting to you. Back in 2015, the DOE passed a law that requires all school staff, anybody that comes in contact with children from grades pre-K through 5, to be trained in child sexual assault. And so this training will make you compliant with that law. The law was done, this training was a collaboration between the DOE and MCASA, which is the main coalition against sexual assault. And it really only skims the surface. It's only an hour, so it's not even going to be nearly what it could be in terms of getting really into depth of the breadth of this topic. We're not going to be able to have a whole lot of time for question and answers. I do have sticky notes on the tables if you have any questions that come up or anything that you're wondering. If you want to put it on the parking lot up here, and Renee and I, if we, after the training, we can look up the answers for you, and we can send out an email to the superintendent, and he can forward that all to you. I would also like to point out that this is a really sensitive topic, and I don't know everyone's personal history. There may be instances where some of you have passed child sexual assault or sexual assault in general, and I want to be sensitive to that and respectful that if you are feeling triggered by this training at all, please feel free to step out and take some time. Also, I'll stick around a little bit after the training if anybody feels like they need to have that additional support. So we did provide some handouts for you, some of the ones that we thought were most important. So you're probably all going to be wondering what's normal sexual development for kids, what's not, what are some of those red flags. We provided some of those handouts. But everything else, I've put together packets for all of the administrators, and so they will have this available for you. There's resources in here. There's other handouts that those administrators may want to make copies of and hand out to their staff. But if you wanted to take a look at this, your administrators will have this handout. So some of the outcomes of the training today, we're going to overview the state law and the policy regarding all of what entails of the child sexual assault prevention education response. So some of those components you're already meeting. If we're coming into your schools and we're teaching prevention education, you're already meeting that. I'm here today doing this training, you're already meeting that. And there are some other areas that are possibilities that you can do in the future to provide in-house trainings and things like that. So you will also have an increased awareness of child sexual assault in general, like what's the definition of that, what is the prevalence. It will increase your awareness of child sexual development, so you'll know what is considered to be normal sexual development in children and what are some of those problematic sexual behaviors that you might be seeing. You'll have an increased ability to effectively respond to student disclosures, sexual behaviors maybe as you see them happening, and also any suspicions of sexual assault. I want to point out here that one of the biggest things is that we don't want to do any harm to kids, and so we want you to know how to feel. Not that it's always comfortable listening to kids with disclosures, but at least having that little bit of information to know how to support them in that moment, because we want to be able to make them feel safe and supported, if they're making a disclosure. And you will understand the school district's response and referral system, so that if a student does disclose something or you are made aware of something that might be going on, knowing that what your procedures are here in the district, knowing that you don't have to take care of it all by yourself. There's a system in place for a reason, and it's important that you utilize that system. Understanding also that some of you may be more comfortable. There are staff here that are specifically trained in doing that type of reporting, but knowing that there's support if you are the one that has to make the report. And also knowing a little bit more about what resources are available to you. So our agency is available to come in and support students and staff regarding child sexual assault, and that can look in a variety of different ways. We can meet individually with students and parents. We could provide support groups. We have all kinds of things that we're able to do. So I did mention the parking lot. If you have any questions, please feel free to write them down. And then just a couple of things that, just try to be as present as you can. Some of it may be hard to listen to, but just, please do your best. Be sensitive to the topic. Try to question your assumptions. There may be some things that you're surprised by in the training, and that's okay. Just be open-minded to those things. So, an overview of the law. There are 5 main components. So, you have to have procedures in place, how to respond appropriately to student disclosures, or if you're witnessing those inappropriate behaviors, and knowing to whom and how you would report those behaviors or disclosures. There's that child sexual assault awareness and prevention education for school personnel, which is why you're here today. It is a 1-hour training, and all staff in the district are required to have that. So it's everybody, including administrators, teachers, guidance counselors, nurses, social workers, secretaries, ed techs, support staff, custodians, tech support, coaches, and bus drivers. So anybody that works as an employee in the district has to have this training. You have to be retrained every 4 years, and then any new hires need to be trained within 6 months of their hire date. So it's very similar to the mandated reporter training, actually. And keeping in mind, too, that, we are all bystanders, so whether we're here in school or we're out in the community, we all have a role to play in trying to prevent child sexual abuse. And so it may not be your students, but it could be people that you know out in the community as well. So having all this information will hopefully serve you in that capacity as well. You have to have an age-appropriate child sexual assault prevention education program delivered by qualified instructors. So currently, I know that between staffers, so myself and my coworker Stephanie Harmon, who's the other educator in our agency, Safe Voices, Hillary Hook comes in and does presentations as well, and also Doug Saunders and Riley Blanchett. We're all currently working together, making sure that all the grades that meet the law, but we are doing pre-K to grade 8, which is great because the law only goes to grade 5, so you guys are doing a great job of that. There are also supplemental things that we can do too, so if you have anything specific that arises within the classroom, we can do things like we've gone into, we've been in Kingfield, we did a presentation about sexting to some of the middle schoolers. So if there are certain topics that come up, we can come in and provide additional education for those. There needs to be a school district response and reporting policy in place, and we will speak about that very, very soon. And knowing what the resources are for any victims of child sexual assault and their non-offending caregivers. So knowing what those resources are and being able to provide those people with that information. So like our agency would be one support. We also work in conjunction, it's a part of our agency, but it is separate. It's called the Children's Advocacy Center. And so if a student were to come forward with a disclosure, the law enforcement and CPS workers, when they get involved, they can make a referral to the CAC. And what it is, it's really a child-centered, very sensitive way of getting a disclosure from a child. So if a child discloses to you, you are mandated to report. Once it goes to the CPS worker, they will contact the Child Advocacy Center, and it's an interview process. So anybody that's in part of that interrogative team, law enforcement, district attorneys, CPS workers, they will come, sit in a room, and then the child with our forensic interviewer will sit in another room, and they will ask questions, getting as much information that they can regarding whatever incident happened, and then that information is actually recorded. So really it's a way of making sure that kids only have to tell their story one time. If they're having to tell their teacher, and then they tell their mom, and then they have to tell the police officer, and then they have to tell, the CPS worker, those stories can look a little different, and sometimes that in itself, like the defense attorney can use that information against them, and the defendant can get off on a technicality because the story isn't consistent. And what this does is it mainstreams that whole system, so that they only have to tell one time, and then that information will be presented if it should go to court. Also knowing that parents can utilize Pine Tree Legal, those are free legal services, and we have referrals for mental health counselors, and there is a victims compensation fund that people can also take part in. So this is an example of model policy regarding child sexual assault prevention and response. It says the Maine legislature requires students to implement a policy to address the prevention, response, and reporting of child sexual abuse within the school setting. The board of, and then that would be your school district, is committed to implementing best practices to prevent and respond to child sexual abuse and to ensure that all children attend a school which is safe and secure learning environment. This policy herein is consistent, and that is actually the law. And I do have handouts in the folders that include the law and the components of the law. So this is actually the DOE legal definition of child abuse, child sexual abuse. All sexual engagement, either through hands-on or hands-off activities between an adult and a child, is sexual abuse. Sexual engagement between children can also be sexual abuse when there is significant age difference between the children, or if the children are very different in development, size, or other power differential. So basically meaning if an older student is abusing a younger child, or if there's anything like a mental or physical disability where one student has a power over another. Those are instances where it would be determined to be child sexual abuse. So this is a website actually, and this presentation is even on this website. It's called the Children's Safety Partnership, and it is what was the organization that was formed between MCASA and the DOE in providing resources to schools and getting all of this stuff in place. So please feel free to utilize this resource, this website. It's there. We're going to talk a little bit about it, and I'll take you in and show you some parts of it as well. Hopefully it's going to work. So this is what the website looks like. This would be the supporting systems. So this would be the school part of the website, and it just talks a little bit about implementing the policy, understanding what your school needs are, how to set and follow effective reporting policies, how to have a safe and healthy school climate, to be a trauma-informed school, and knowing what your local resources are. And each one of these has like a drop-down, so you just click on it and then it would tell you a little bit more information about it. And it also does give links embedded within the website that will take you to other websites to provide more information. So when you first go to the website, that's what it looks like. There is there's a community section, so that would be for parents, families, and community members. There's information in there regarding things like normal sexual development, what are some of the red flags to look for. And then there's information in there specifically geared towards educators and administrators if you go into the school department. And then there's just a Q&A section that if you have a more specific question, you could go into that section and see if you can find the answer in there. And again, if you have questions and you can't find answers on this website, please feel free to reach out and contact our agency. We can help out as well. So this slide just shows you all of the different trainings that are available through the Children's Safety Partnership. There was a training available to administrators that would give them information regarding implementation of all of this law. There's a training that the personnel awareness training is what we're doing today. And there is an opportunity for, there's a training that MCASA does. It's free. Any educators, anybody that works for the district that would be interested in learning to do this presentation, so doing what I do, they could be trained in how to do that, and it would help maybe for like rehires or stuff. But please know that we're always available, and we are a free resource to come in and do that training for you. There's a training also, if you didn't have resources to be able to do the child sexual assault curriculum, teachers could go and learn how to do that, but I don't think you guys need anything else on your plate, so please reach out to us. So now we're going to get into the sort of the meat and bones of the training. And the definition of child sexual abuse is any sexual activity between an adult and a child or adolescent is abusive and illegal. It is an exploitation of power and usually of trust. Sexual activity between two children of significantly unequal power or development can also be abusive. Sexual abuse includes both touching and non-touching acts. So as far as like non-touching acts, it's any sort of, if a child is being shown pornography, if a child is, if an adult were to expose themselves to a child, any types of those things where there's no physical contact happening, but children are being exposed to sexual acts or sexual visualizations that they shouldn't be seeing, that is included in the definition of child sexual abuse. So again, if you go into the website, this would be the Your Questions section, and those are some of the topics that would come up. And we're going to get into in-depth in some of them, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into the website itself. As far as statistics go, I'm not going to overwhelm you with a ton of them today, but I think it's really important to know that the vast majority of sexual abuse in general is never reported. So you can imagine how it is for children to be able to have to report that. Most cases, actually 85% of minors who experience any form of sexual assault, they never report, or they wait to report, so they don't report until they become an adult. And research shows that children rarely make up accusations. So if a student is coming to you with a disclosure, please believe them. They're coming to you because they trust you, and it may be their only opportunity to tell what's happening to them. And if they don't feel trusted and believed and supported, they may never share that story again. Okay, so you could possibly be that one chance to get them some help. So it's not really our role to question whether things are happening, and ask, are you sure, or anything like that. We're going to talk about responding to a disclosure, but just know, please just listen and believe them, and then make that report and get them some help. So how often does child sexual abuse happen? The statistics show that 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 20 boys experience child sexual abuse. In Maine, that's about 7% of high school students, so 10% of girls and 4.1% of boys report that they have been forced to have sex in their life. In Maine, 10 to 15% of girls and 5% of boys report having been forced to have sexual contact in any way. There are many other kinds of sexual abuse that don't include physical contact, and sexual abuse is one of the most underreported crimes in our country. So the numbers of victims are much higher than what we're actually getting reports from law enforcement. And I know personally, I work on our helpline, and most of the calls that I've received so far have been regarding children. And statistically, our helpline, 50% of our calls that are coming in are regarding children. I wanted to point out that this Darkness to Light is another good resource for you. There's information on that website that may be helpful to you in responding to any disclosures that you may have. And I also I wanted to point out, our agency, SAPRS, covers Franklin, Oxford, and Androscoggin counties, and in the state as a whole, we have one of the highest report rates of child sexual assault in the entire state. And Maine as a whole has one of the highest rates in the entire country. So if you look at it in those terms, it's happening way more than what we really even imagine. In terms of who is abusing children, there's this misnomer out there that it's the stranger danger, it's the creepy white van that's driving by and the kids are getting abducted. That's really not the case. Only 7% of cases are actually involving a stranger. 93% of cases, that means that the child knows who their abuser is. 59% of those are just family acquaintances, and 34% are actually family members. These statistics come from an agency called RAIN, and they have a lot of good resources as well. That is another resource that I would recommend if you wanted more information on this. So if we get into understanding what normal sexual development is, as bystanders, we need to educate ourselves how to distinguish between what is considered developmentally expected sexual behavior and then what is potentially problematic sexual behavior. And so this knowledge is where we base our information on whether we should make a report or not. You may see things and hear things that you question. I'm not sure if this is normal. I'm not sure if this is something that would be reportable. Basing your decision to report should always be done on the knowledge that you have, not just because you get an icky feeling. Although certainly that icky feeling is usually a good sign. And just because a behavior is considered typical or developmentally expected, it does not necessarily mean that it is acceptable or appropriate in every context. So for example, we all know that young children like to be naked. They like to run around with no clothes on. But would that be appropriate for them to be doing at school? No, that's sort of a social norm that we know. But kids who are being abused, they don't always realize those different norms in society. And so if they're coming to school and, maybe it happens once, well, maybe the child just needed a teachable moment. If it's happening recurrently and then there are other things maybe going on, that could be a red flag that something's going on. So developmentally expected behaviors from infancy, so ages 0 to 2. From birth to age 2, children are learning and exploring the world around them, and that includes their bodies. Some of those expected behaviors is that they will start exploring manually their whole entire body, and that does include their genitals. They will touch their genitals for pleasure. Masturbation in this age is completely normal. It is just a physical response to stimulation, and it's not anything that they can control. And they do enjoy being naked. Ages 3 to 5. So their world is expanding. Maybe they're not just at home with their caregiver, their parent anymore. They're expanding. They're going to preschool. They're going to play groups. They're doing all kinds of things and meeting and being around different people. And this is actually the age where they are at highest risk because they don't know the difference between what's right and what's wrong. They're vulnerable. They may not have those verbal skills to communicate what's going on with them. They can learn to be very fearful of certain people, but they can also be very trusting of people. So they're making friends and they're beginning to connect more with the adults beyond their family. They're becoming more mobile and verbal. They want to explore and learn about everything. And so expected behaviors here, again, they still will touch their genitals for pleasure. They will play games like doctor, exploring the differences between a boy and a girl because they're curious and they want to know why does your look different than mine? And so they'll start asking questions. And they may start asking questions about like where babies come from and how were they born. So some signs and behaviors, some red flags of sexual assault. So if they're knowing about sex acts that are out of the ordinary or unexpected for their age, that would be a red flag. If they're saying, drawing, or doing anything sexual towards people, animals, things like toys, their stuffed animals, anything like that, that could be a red flag. Masturbating until they hurt, if they're doing it multiple times a day, or they're using any sort of items, or they're doing any sort of thrusting activity, that also could be a sign. If there is trouble with sleep, if they're self-harming, they have fear of certain adults, like, a certain relative comes around and they don't see them, that could be a sign. And not wanting to be left alone. In older children, so ages 6 and older, any early sexual activities with peers, so if they're engaging in sexual activity below what we would consider a normal expected age, that would be a concern. If they're having frequent sexual activity, having problems with eating, committing unlawful, dangerous, or risky acts, running away, substance abuse, self-destructive activities. Now, realizing that these could also be signs of other kinds of trauma that they may be experiencing, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's sexual abuse, but knowing that they are red flags, and even if it's not sexual abuse, it could be some other trauma, and these still could be reportable incidences. So a student comes to you and tells you that something is happening to them, and so knowing how to respond to those situations. We want to model communication, empathy, and accountability. So let's say we were seeing something happening in school, and we knew that it was not appropriate to be happening in school. We don't want to shame the student for doing that, but we also want to address it in the moment. So you as a person, it's important to remain calm in the moment, continuing to assess the situation and what's going on and what's being said and what they're saying, and then if there's the possibility, redirecting that behavior. So, for example, in the communication piece, you want to be clear and direct about what you're seeing that child do. An example, could be, I see you keep trying to give Susie a kiss. Okay? You're communicating what you're seeing to that child and letting them know what the behavior is that you're addressing. Fostering empathy, you want to really respond from a personal place and understanding that they may or may not know what they're doing is wrong, because it may be a normal thing in their life. You want to label what your feelings are, or also what the other student might be feeling. So, for example, I feel uncomfortable when, or your friend looks scared and confused or angry. In the situation with Susie, saying, Susie keeps pulling away. She's telling you no and looks uncomfortable. So you're showing empathy for Susie because Susie's not being respected. She's feeling uncomfortable, and the other student is not respecting her words. And then having some accountability also. So we may need to ask some clarifying questions, but we won't always, in situations like this, want to avoid the why question, because kids don't know why they're doing these types of behaviors. And we also don't want to shame them, again, by asking why it's placing the blame on them. And again, they may or may not know that what they're doing is inappropriate. It could be just a learned behavior that they've learned because it's happening to them. So in the situation with Susie at school, we don't kiss each other, and we listen to our friends' words. It's holding them accountable, knowing that that's a boundary at school. We're not going to kiss our friends. And when your friend is telling you no, you need to listen to them and respect that. So in the packet, I also have another handout that I think will be beneficial. There are some other things that you could say in situations like that that would be supportive in promoting all of these things with communication and empathy and accountability. So I would encourage that be a resource that get copied and out to everybody as well. So in the moment, if you're having a disclosure, you want to stay calm, or if you're seeing a behavior happening, you don't want to ignore the behavior by any means. You want to address it as immediately as possible. Avoid shaming, avoid those probing questions, asking why, and then again, redirecting. So, just some additional things as to responding to disclosures. It's okay. So you want to just listen to them talk. You don't want to question them or avoid asking as many questions as you can, because it's not your role to be the investigator. Just like with mandated reporting, that's someone else's job. So avoid those why questions. Validate their feelings. I can see that you're really upset about this, or I can't imagine how you're feeling. Thank them for sharing with you. It's okay to tell them that they're brave for sharing. It's okay to tell them that it's not their fault. Okay, making them feel good about having to tell somebody something that horrific that is happening to them will make them feel better about doing that. After the disclosure, you want to write down everything that you remember the child saying with as much detail as possible, and what you observed. So how is the child's demeanor and those types of things? Were they crying? You know, trying to be as objective as possible in that situation. Don't make promises, so don't say things like, oh, the person that did this to you is going to go to jail, because we can't make those promises. We don't know, once it gets into the system, we don't know what's going to happen. Also not saying, you should have told somebody. You should have done something. That's also not a good thing to say, because that does promote that shamefulness. Well, yeah, I should have done it and I didn't. Don't confront the offender if you know them. That will also interfere with that whole investigative process. So, yeah, again, that's not anybody else's role but law enforcement to be involved in that process. And then once you've gathered, you've gotten all that information, it's your responsibility to make that report and following what your school's reporting procedures are. Again, most importantly, believe what they're saying and report it so that they can get help. There are also some things that I wanted to include specifically because they're not included in this, but some reasons why kids don't disclose. One of them is fear of what will happen to them or their family, especially if it is a family member that is doing, is the abuser. Fear of not being believed. They're not telling because they don't think anybody is going to believe them. Feeling shameful or guilt and that it's their fault that it's happening. They may be being told it's your fault that I'm doing this to you. Fear of what will happen to their abuser, especially if it's a loved one, like a family member or somebody that they know in the community. And the closer they are to their abuser, the less likely they are to come forward and make a disclosure. And children often think that this is normal behavior, and they don't know that it's not safe, that it is abuse. And so it's hard for them to recognize that this behavior is abusive, then it becomes our responsibility to recognize those warning signs and move forward with getting them some support. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Renee, and she's going to talk specifically about the reporting procedures.
Thank you. Oh yeah. The fun little thing that you gotta wear here. Okay. So I'm Renee Whitley. I'm from the Franklin County Children's Task Force, and Paul and I made the decision to sort of do this training together because there's some really great melding of the two systems, but there are also some real separate reporting requirements that we want to make sure everybody has a clear understanding of. I know that you've all had mandated reporter trainings, and bravo to your district for providing that. It's very important for us to understand that when we're making a report for any type of abuse, whether it be child sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, that the process that your district puts in place is followed, but it's also really important for you to understand that that mandate is yours personally. There is a process in place in your institution that you should follow, but the mandate is yours personally, which means that you are the one who can lose your certification, your teaching certification, your social work license, any of that if the report is not followed through with. So you want to ensure that you follow the process to a T that is set forth in your personnel policies or your district policies. And that should include a response from whoever in your building or your organization or entity is responsible for making that report. And you want to make sure you get that in writing that the report was made. Okay? One of the pieces that it's really important for people to understand is that if you suspect something And Paula talked about that icky feeling. That icky feeling usually comes from something really concrete that you see or hear. And that would be the time when you start paying a little bit closer attention. Some of the inappropriate behavior that you might see that makes you feel that way. You may see an adult and a child having a lot of close contact with each other alone. And I'm in a school, so I'm going to use the school setting as an example. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. I'm just using it as an example. If there is a student who is staying after school with a coach or a teacher, and they're alone a lot of the time, that would be something that you would want to pay attention to. If you were looking at an adult that was picking up a child a lot of times from a practice that had not a lot of contact with the school system, wasn't a well-known person to the teacher or the administrator that child has a lot of contact with, that might be a little bit of a red flag and be like, I wonder why that's happening. Usually if a child is being picked up by someone other than the parent, we know about it, right? But where this goes up to 5th grade, at 5th grade those kids are learning some anonymity, so that might happen that they may be picked up by somebody else. Boundaries are put in place so that they are adhered to, so you as educators don't put yourself in a position that can be misinterpreted. So we want to make sure that everyone understands what appropriate behavior is. When you're talking about making a report, who is required to make a report? Anybody that is in this room is required, and that includes custodians, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, food service, teachers, administrators, anyone who has any contact with a teacher. You are required while doing the duties of your job to report. If you are out on a Saturday morning at the beach and you are with your family enjoying your first vacation day and you see something that just does not look right, or you go into a bathroom and you see something happening, are you required to report under the mandate of your job and your law? No, you are not. However, morally, I would like to think that everyone here would, right? So what gets reported when you see something? You're going to make sure that you are going to your supervisor or following the procedure that is set up within your entity, and you're going to take down the information that you have after the child discloses to you. When the child is telling you what's happening, I don't want you to say, "Excuse me, let me go get a clipboard," because that's going to be super intimidating to that child. I also don't think it's a really good idea to be standing over a child. When a child is making themselves vulnerable to you, how scary is it to look up and see somebody that's, a lot taller than you? Being only 5 feet tall myself, I can tell you that it's extremely intimidating. So when you are making that report, you are going to report directly to Maine DHHS. And in the packets that were handed out, you should all have a participant packet that looks like this. This actually has the phone number right on the front. I think Jeff told me he has it pretty much memorized, which is great. That's what we want to hear. So as you are making that report, you're going to take the notes that you have written down, and you are going to think about, before you get on the phone, how you're going to report, what you're going to say. It's okay to actually write it out if you need to. Every school district, every entity is a little bit different. At my agency, if we have to make a report, we have an internal file that is kept under lock and key that has the basic information about why the report was made, who made the report. I believe in Paula's agency, they use initials on a file, or maybe the first 2 letters of the last name and the first initial, so that they can identify. And the reason for that is that if you leave after you've made a report and you move to California, and that case is ongoing for a long period of time, there may be need for them to come back and actually look at, okay, what was the original report that was made? and who was the original person who made the report. So it's important for there to be some sort of record on file. And you should also, as the administrator and the person responsible for making the report, you should be writing down who you spoke to on the phone when you made the report. Don't assume that just because you call the police and report it to the police that that report is going to automatically be made to DHS. 99.5% of the time it is, but there's always that 0.5% that it isn't. Or something gets stuck in a piece of paper, or something gets stuck in a pile. So I always urge you to make that phone call to DHS as well as the police. Now, when you are making that report, I want the papers to flip. Just give me a second. When you're making the report, you're going to want to make sure that you make the report as soon as possible. You are going to, if you are in an after-school program, you are going to make that report as soon as you see your administrator. Don't send it in an email and forget about it. Okay, you can do that if you just need to remind yourself, but you need to follow up with them in person and let them know what you've seen, what you've witnessed. If you are uncomfortable with making sure that you got all the information that was needed, I do have a cheat sheet that I will email to all of the administrators that we use that's super helpful, because when you get on the phone with the person that you're making the report to, there's a lot of different questions that they're going to ask you. They're going to ask you if the child goes to childcare, who picks up the child, how many people are living in the home? Are they all related? Is mom and dad married? Is there a step-parent here, a step-parent there? Is there shared time? They're going to ask a lot of questions, and you are going to sit there like a deer in the headlights if you're not prepared. And it's okay to say, I'm not sure. Never guess. Be very concrete in what your knowledge is. And I will tell you that some of the most valuable reports that go in are done by bus drivers, because they see the child hesitating to get off the bus when there's a certain car in the driveway. They see the child, coming to school in the morning, and they recognize when there are certain people there, or certain people at the bus stop, or certain people putting the child on the bus. So don't discount your role in reporting, because there are some very important indicators that can be missed if you do. So when you make the report, you're going to call the hotline. If you are calling, you're going to want to obviously make sure you follow the procedure of your school. If you don't report directly, if you have an administrator that reports, then you want to make sure in writing that you get a response from that person that's reporting within 48 hours. That's what the law says, and if it's not done, then again, remember, it's your mandate. But you still want to follow up with the administrator and make sure that they are aware that they didn't meet their mandate, okay? Every report should be documented, and it will be documented when you make the call. Calls are held for 18 months, and if another report does not come in that 18-month period, then that call is expunged, okay? Not every call that is made to the department is going to be investigated. All right, that's really important for everybody to know. It may be screened out. They have a new structure within the Department of Health and Human Services called structured decision making, and it's a very black and white decision making process. It screens in more than it screens out. However, there is an opportunity at different junctures for humans to intervene rather than a computer to do it and say, we've had another report from a different entity. It could have been a doctor's office, it could have been a child care provider, it could have been a school nurse, it could have been a pediatrician. So we're screening this one in. So written documentation should be limited. You don't want to put, again, things that you're guessing about. You don't want to ad-lib what the child said to you. It's very dangerous because everything is open to interpretation. You only want to require required information, and no personal assessment or conclusion. Individuals should discuss their concerns with as few people as possible. And I'm going to tell you that that is one thing that will shut a child up quicker than you can imagine, is if that child makes a disclosure to someone that they trust, and then they see that person walk over to another person and start having a conversation, and they both turn around and look at that child. That child is not stupid. They know what's happening. They know that people are talking about them, and they trusted you. They didn't trust every Tom, Dick, and Harry that you come across, okay? So it's a lot of weight to put on yourself, but if you need to talk to somebody, then talk to them out of the view of the child. So in the packets that we sent around earlier, there's actually a couple of really good resources. One of them is the Sexual Behavior Guide, and it gives really, really specific, detailed behaviors that are considered appropriate, inappropriate, and concerning. And I would say we printed these out specifically so every teacher would have a copy, because I don't want you guys having to Google something. Okay, I want you to know this is okay, or this is not okay, or this is normal, or this is not normal. And as parents, we all question, right? The first time that our child discovers their body parts, we're all questioning. And so this is super handy to have. Okay, and it's for all different age groups, so I would say use it as much as possible. In the other handout that we gave you guys, there are some risk factors that you can look at in there. There's also the DHS mandate. So just to clarify, there are 2 mandates that are now on you, and it's a little confusing. So one of them is the mandated reporter mandate, which is any form of abuse or neglect needs to be reported. Okay, that's sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect itself. And then there's the other mandate through the DOE, the Department of Education, that says that you are mandated to learn about how to report and identify sexual abuse of children. If you are an educator or an administrator or a bus driver or a food service worker or anybody that works with children in a school district from pre-K to 5. So there are 2 separate laws that are in effect here, and there are 2 separate policies for your district around these. The same outcome happens. The reason that this was put in place is because there was an overhaul of child sexual reporting, and there has been a huge spike in child sexual assault and a large spike in the reporting of it, which is what we want to see. But it's really important for you to understand that when you are calling to report child sexual abuse, you can call law enforcement, you can call DHS, but if you're going to call DHS, you want to make sure that you're also calling law enforcement. Okay, make the calls to both. Chances are within 24 hours, sometimes by the end of the school day, there's going to be somebody here paying attention, and it's going to be most likely law enforcement. Were you going to ask a question?
Does that mean even for any type of abuse that you're reporting, or specifically sexual?
Just specifically sexual abuse, yes. Yep. Yes. So there are a lot of resources in this community. Everyone thinks that because the town of Salem is so far up here and isolated that you don't have the benefit of awesome resources, and that is just not true. There are 2 statewide entities. MICASA is the overarching entity that supports all the sexual assault crisis and support centers, and they also support SAPPERS. SAPPERS is the local child sexual abuse response services. They are the gurus. If anyone makes a report to me or calls me and says, I have a question about this, I'm calling Paula, because that's Paula's forte. She is awesome at responding, having conversations with students, and with administrators. I am certainly completely available to help you go through the form to make a report if you are questioning the information that you have on it. But I want to make sure that you understand that sexual assault services in Franklin County is through SAPRS. Yes, the Children's Task Force is happy to help with any other form of child abuse, neglect, emotional abuse, but our expertise is not in sexual assault of children. We are about prevention, okay? And there's a lot of different resources on the website. You can, if you click on the Families and Communities section, you're going to be taken to the different sites that teach you what you as a common community member can learn about the prevention of child sexual abuse. You can learn how to talk to your children about them. I will say that one of the things that we always encourage is using appropriate terminology when you are talking about or talking to a child. And I'm going to pick on Vika here for a minute. You know, in gym class, children sometimes get injured. And if they get injured and they are injured in their genital area, it's a penis and a vagina. We use the proper terminology because when children are telling you things, they may be using terms that are only known to their offender. And that's a really important component to when they respond, when they report to somebody or make a spontaneous sort of statement to somebody that their genitalia is being called something else. So if there is some suspicion there and there is some other names being used for genitalia, then it's really important for you to document that because that's information that's going to be super helpful. I'm going to tell you just a quick story because one of my very first cases that I worked on up here in northern Franklin County was in Eustis. And I was working with David St. Laurent, and him and I had been meeting on a very different, in a different situation. And I casually mentioned to him that I needed to get ready to go on a visit with a family I was working with. And I had to find some jungle animals because this child just wanted to play jungle. And he looked at me and he said, "What did you say?" And I said, "This child just wants to play jungle." And he said, "Does this child live?" And he gave me a general vicinity. And I said, "Yeah, why?" And he said, "We need to talk." This child had been one of many victims of someone who had been perpetrating on children in that area, and their go-to name for a child's vagina was the jungle. And this child, during our visits, had always said to me, "I want to play jungle, I want to play jungle, I want to play jungle." I would bring lions and tigers and bears, oh my, and that was not cutting it for playing in the jungle. Little did I know that that's what was going on for this child. So it's extremely important for the proper terminology to be used when you're discussing sexual abuse or even when you're addressing a child and you're discussing their genitalia. Is that it? Okay. So that's it for us. If you have any questions, sorry, all of a sudden she gave me the time sign and I was like, that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to put them on your sticky notes. If you can bring them up here and stick them on the stage, and we will take them and we will respond by email to your building administrator. Thank you. Is that all right?